This is the sixth episode of Positionality Podcast. In today's topic, we are exploring the importance of social entrepreneurship in the Tibetan community. So, what is social entrepreneurship? Well, according to Google, social entrepreneurship is an approach by individuals, groups, startup companies, or entrepreneurs in which they develop, fund, and implement solutions to social, cultural, environmental issues. In order to explore this topic, we have Tsechu Dolma as our guest, who founded the Mountain Resiliency Project in 2014, otherwise known as MRP. MRP is a sustainable, community developed organization that addresses poverty and food insecurities in the Himalayas. MRP has helped 15,000 farmers from the mountain communities to grow, harvest, and sell crops that are resilient to the mountain climate to give economic freedom to the farmers. Her work has been recognized by Forbes 30 Under 30, Asia Society Young Leaders, and Brewer Youth Award. Tsechu is a Tibetan born in Nepal, and she immigrated to the US at the age of 11. She has a bachelor in environmental science and master's of public administration from Columbia University. Tsechu recently completed her MBA from Oxford University. Tsechu, congratulations on graduating and all of your accomplishment.
Thank you, Rigzin. Thank you, Tenzin. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, of course. We're so glad that you're here. It's an honor to have you on our small podcast. So really feeling lucky that we have this space to explore this kind of topic and have you here.
Yeah, thank you for making the space available.
Of course. So before we get into the heavy stuff, let's have a little icebreaker, I guess. What would you say your top 5 favorite things to do in your free time?
My first thing is going on walks. I really love going on walks, whether it's going on a hike up a mountain or whether it's walking around city blocks. I've always really found it very thought clearing. And then the second would be calling my mom or calling my family. It's pretty quick and easy, but it's always a mood lifter. And the third would be picking up a book. It's mostly digital, like audiobooks these days, but it helps a lot. And the fourth would be just browsing the internet to see what news is going on, mostly the FT, the Times, the Economist. And then my fifth would be listening to Headspace.
Oh, nice. So you mentioned that you like going for walks on the block. Are you from New York City?
Yeah. I grew up in Astoria and Woodside, so walking around Astoria Park or Woodside Park has always been my favorite.
Oh, nice. Is that still a thing with COVID? Are people more ease at work walking around the blocks? Or
Yeah. My family, a lot of us, we just walk. So from where we live, it's about 3/4 of a mile to get to the Tibetan Community Hall. So we walk towards the community hall, do like a kora, even though the community hall is closed, do a kora around the building, or just continue walking towards Jackson Heights and maybe grab a plate of momos and then walk back home. It's a good 2-3 mile loop.
that sounds like a dream in order to walk and then get momos. I would love that.
It's a great incentive.
I live in I recently moved to Burlington, Vermont, and there's one momo place, and that's like a Nepalese restaurant, but I would love to live in a place that has like momos where if I just take a walk. Yeah, so my favorite things to do is, let's see, I like walking. I can't jog anymore. I can't run anymore, but walking is great. I also like reading. I usually love my morning, like hot tea time or morning afternoon because I work late. I also enjoy playing video games, which is a side of me that a lot of people don't know. Like growing up, I used to play a lot of video games. So that's like, I still like when it's like me time, I play video games. And the fifth is definitely talking to friends and family. It's always nice to like, connect back to them and have these moments where, that you find them precious. All right, so the question number 2 is, what was your journey like leading up to the Mountain Resiliency Project?
It was a pretty long process. I mean, since high school, um, so when you're a Tibetan growing up in New York, or I guess in most cities around North America, you get very closely tied to a lot of local nonprofits. So for us in New York, it was places like New York Association of New Americans, NIANA. That's where a lot of us went for Tibetan school on weekends. And you get exposed to so many nonprofits, and you learn about all this volunteering and how important it is to lead community service in your community. You get that drilled into you pretty early on. So I knew from high school, I really wanted to continue volunteering, but that I was also starting to develop my own ideas about what kind of volunteering work I wanted to do. And I was really struck by what was still happening in the refugee camps that I grew up in Nepal, and how the Tibetan refugee camps, how little has changed in the 50, 60 years that we've been in exile. So that was really important to me. And I really wanted to work on how do we increase economic activity in these refugee camps, right? And we have dozens of Tibetan refugee camps all over India, Nepal, and Bhutan. And a lot of them are very remote, and the remote ones are they're rural, they're on sitting on fertile land, and there's a lot of economic like agricultural opportunities for them. So I really wanted to tap into that, and that's how we came up with Mountain Resiliency when I was in college.
This was your undergrad?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So why are the mountains so resistant to the change? Like you said, it has been like 30, 40 years and there's still not a lot of change. Why do you think that is?
There's been very little investment so for a lot of the Tibetan refugee camps and other villages that have ethnic minorities in them in Nepal and India, there is very little state investment into economic development in these areas because most of them are minorities with very little to no voices in local government. So there is no local investment going on. On top of it, a lot of them don't fall on the tourist route, so they haven't been able to take advantage of the tourism revenue. And then on top of it, because of globalization, a lot more youths are leaving these camps and villages to seek opportunities elsewhere, whether it's in the cities or whether it's in Western countries. Yeah, so there's a lot of family separation going, there's a lot of state negligence going, and it's just perpetrated through all these decades. And it's time to start reinvesting and start rethinking what opportunities can come out of this.
Do you think that is happening, or do you think it's still continuing that young people are moving away and the state is still neglecting these local farms?
I think in the last decade, like since the 2010s, there is still out migration, but there is a lot more. I see a lot more youth trying to attempt to start a business in the communities that they're from. I see a lot more of that happening. I see young people looking for opportunities and not just completely riding out, going back home. So it's a growing movement, but it's quite slow.
Okay. So in one of your bios, you mentioned that social entrepreneurship is the key component to addressing inequities and development gaps. What kind of social entrepreneurship do you think we need in the Tibetan community, and how does one start the social entrepreneurship?
Yeah, social entrepreneurship has become a buzzword these days. Everyone seems to be using it. And when I first heard about it, I thought it was really daunting and I did not understand what it really meant. I thought it was what young white people did when they went to Africa or wherever they said they were going. But it was pretty simple. When I talked to my parents said when they came from Tibet to Nepal as refugees, they couldn't work because they had no papers. So instead of working, they had to start selling, because if you can't get hired, then you have to start selling. And that's exactly what my parents started doing. So they started their own enterprise. They started their own textile enterprise for Tibetan rugs. so for me, that was really easy. I was like, okay, here is my parents starting their own carpet business. And at the same time, this carpet business has a lot of social and economic and environmental value that they're adding back to the community in terms of using that money to invest in education, using that money to invest in clean energy, using that money to invest in future handicraft skills development for everyone else. So that was the example I used for my parents, and for me that's what social entrepreneurship meant. And I think that's exactly what social entrepreneurship will look like for Tibetan communities around the world. In Nepal and India and Bhutan, I think it will be taking advantage of our cultural heritage, taking advantage of local knowledge and using that to generate revenue. And then in the US and Canada and Europe, I think it would be a lot more young people using their education to start businesses, whether it's back in the refugee camps or whether it's in their new communities in Queens, New York, or Jameson, Canada. It will just be a new iteration of starting local businesses and using that local business to inspire other young people in our community to start their own businesses, hire young talent in our community, use our local talent, use our traditional knowledge to expand on opportunities for our youth. I think that's what social entrepreneurship will look like in the Tibetan community.
Okay, thank you for that. You've accomplished so much at a really young age and as a woman of color and an immigrant. What kind of environment did you grow up in that shaped you the person you are today?
Mm-hmm. I grew up in a Tibetan refugee camp in Nepal that probably had around 300 to 500 families. It's a pretty decent sized community, and we had a lot of issues in terms of economic empowerment issues. We had a lot of gender-based violence in our community. We had a lot of education gap in terms of children were receiving free primary education, but higher education was still out of reach for us. So that was the kind of community, that was the kind of environment I grew up in. So for me, it was really important to find solutions to these problems. So all of my work, it really doesn't mean much to me in terms of it's not a success in that we're still a work in progress trying to reach a goal for the community. And if more young people can, young and older people can start using these inspirations to implement more changes for them, I think that is our end goal.
Amazing. So this is kind of a fun question I'm throwing out there. What are some of your aspirations?
I have a lot of dreams for me to because I think about my parents a lot. I think about my parents and what are their aspirations for me. And my parents' aspirations for me was mainly just to get educated, but to also become a female leader in our community, whether it's the Tibetan American community or the Tibetan exile community in general. It was very important for my parents, especially my mom, for to have a strong daughter who can speak in public and can share my modern progressive thoughts. So yeah, I think those are my aspirations: leadership.
Amazing. I feel like a lot of us, or a lot of Tibetans, we really look up to our parents, and I think it's like a special quality that we hold, that, really involve our parents and their dreams. And for us, what kind of privilege do you think you hold as an Asian American in the US?
Being an Asian American woman, especially a darker skin colored Asian American woman, it's a mixed bag. There are definitely pros and cons. I mean, in terms of, I cannot even compare my experience to a Black woman's experience, or I can't compare it to a white woman's experience, but I've dealt with my fair share of discrimination and the whole exoticizing of Asian American women. I've dealt with a lot of that, and even showing up to meetings as a founder of a startup, it is very it's very easy to get dismissed, and it's always a struggle to constantly look for allies that are male or white or middle age to vouch for you. It's a lot of alliance development that it's a lot of alliance legwork that you have to do, being brown woman. So yeah, it's been a mixed bag experience, but I'm trying my best to understand my privileges, and I'm trying my best to read up more on the Black community's experience in the US and around the world.
Okay. So do you, when you have to make allies and stuff, are they white men, especially when you're trying to get fundings and stuff like that? Like, what are the people that are like the main demographics?
It depends. So if I'm trying to find funding or in the US, then absolutely they really like seeing a white person next to you as a co-founder or a partner, because they think that adds a stamp of legitimacy. Otherwise, if you just show up, they think they're gonna run away or something. And then back in Asia, Tibetan, Nepali, Indian communities, you'd need a more middle-aged uncle figure to show up to meetings with you, so that it looks like, hey, there's an adult supervision going on here too. So yeah, it's very gendered and it's very racially driven depending on which setting I'm in.
Right. But I think it's still insane that it's 2020 and we still need this kind of, I don't know, we don't need it, but society chooses to decide just because you're a person of color and you're a woman that you're not, you're not reliable. You need some kind of middle-aged man or a white man or a woman. I find it very disturbing, and I'm sure you do too. I just think that I live in a very white neighborhood. Even where grew up, I was born in upstate, not born, sorry. I grew up in upstate New York, and now moving to Vermont, everyone is really white. And I still do feel that sometimes like my word to people are not as legitimate as if I have a white companion or a white friend, and then I feel like people take me more serious, which is kind of like a sad thing to like talk about or like to feel, because like it shouldn't be like that. And I'm sure like especially in like the business world or more professional world, like that it should not be that way, but it is. But I really hope that is something that changes, and people start to have more discourse about stuff like this and really trying to implement why that is wrong, not just on the people of color and women's side, but also on the middle-aged men and like white, white women and all of that. My next question to you is, what part of identity did you struggle with the most? I mean, you touched a little bit on it, but if you could just like talk about other struggles that you had. I mean, everyone has struggles. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Growing up in Queens, going to school versus coming back home after 3 p.m., it was a different, like I felt like I was stuck in a different world from 7 a.m. till 3 p.m. and then 4 p.m. onwards. And after coming home, you just step into a very traditional home, and you just tap into this Tibetan world, and then even within family dynamics, it's very different. Being the second youngest daughter in a family of seven, it's very different in like how you behave. And then when you go back to school, your parents are always telling you, oh, you have to speak up, you have to always represent Tibet all the time, you have to stand Tibet all the time. So in school, I was always pushed by my parents to be very vocal and to be not just a teacher's pet, but also campaigning for student body and stuff, and leading club activities in school. So I felt like at school I was a very vocal a student leader, and then when I got back home, I had to be the second youngest daughter in a family of seven. So negotiating these multitudes of identity, it was very confusing for me in the start. But I think this is what Tibetan Americans and other Asian Americans and other like any other refugees or immigrants out there who have to negotiate these different worlds are really good at. You learn from a really young age to be a cultural bridge, to be a community translator, not just through language, but through cultural knowledge. And you learn these things. You have to pick these up really quickly, and you have to learn how to think in your feet all the time. So I'm really grateful for these identities, and I'm still trying to find other aspects of my identity that I'm not very in touch with. And now that I'm in my mid-20s, yeah, I will definitely use the rest of my adult life trying to figure out how do I negotiate this multitude of identities that we have.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of Asian Americans kind of have the struggle of negotiating their multiple identities because we're not just Asian American, we are Tibetan, and that carries a different kind of weight, I feel like. Even at young age, I always felt like, I think till the age of grade 7, I always felt that like free Tibet, free Tibet. Whenever I went to 5th grade or 6th grade or 7th grade, I just, that was like weighing heavy on me, while all the other kids, all they cared about was like what they're having for lunch. But I was like, no, I was like always very serious because I was implemented at such a young age that like we didn't have a country, and that we need to go back, but in order to that we need to preserve our language and culture. So I do think that a lot of us carry this weight, and we're trying to negotiate our multiple identities. Thank you for bringing that up. So my last question to you, Tsijula, is what is the next step for you? Like, what are you doing? Is there any new projects that are up and coming?
Yeah, I've been rethinking the underpinnings of disparity in our community, and since 2017. When I first started Mountain Resiliency in 2014, well, we actually started in 2012, but I wasn't doing it full time until 2014. It was a really different world back in 2012, 2014. Everyone was super hopeful about the political developments in the US. So I thought, okay, this is a perfect time for me to pivot to my birthplace, right? Going back to Nepal, seeing what's happening there, helping out there. But since 2017, it's been, I see what's happening with immigrants in the US, and it's just getting worse and worse. I mean, November 4th, I don't know what world will come out of on November 4th after Election Day, but it's going to be a very different world, for better or for worse. And depending on that, yeah, I think I may pivot back to living in the US and working in the US, working on civil rights in the US, specifically for migrants. And how do we create better systems of protection and power for migrants? That will be my priority. And I've been at Oxford, I was able to work on a lot of technology projects that are the current developments in technology are disempowering vulnerable communities of color, and we're being left out at a rapid pace. And inclusion and equity in technology is very important to me. And how do we create better empowering digital tools to empower our communities? That's what I've been really thinking about. And I've been thinking about how do we build resiliency in migrant communities and build power and protection through technology. So that's what I've been thinking about for the future, but I don't know what's going to happen after Election Day, and I'm looking forward to it.
So I guess we'll wait and see. But definitely update us. So we're curious too. Siju, this is it for our time, but we want to thank you for all that you do for our community and inspiring so many young Tibetans. You're not just a social entrepreneur, you're a role model, you're a leader. We really thank you, and we're so glad to share this space with you today. So thank you, Tijula.
No, thank you, Rinzin, and thank you, Tenzin, for having this platform. I'm really glad that people are tuning in, and I'm glad that this is your 6th episode, and I really hope you guys will keep it going, and I'm happy to support it in any way I can.
Thank you, Tejula.